Hi, Clive. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Zoe. Thank you.
I'm going to sort of approach this by asking you a few questions that lead on from Louise's section, really, but also we're very interested to hear from you about the practical implications for local authorities. And obviously you're on the front line and you're doing this planning, all this planning, we're talking about all this use of data. So I think probably the best place to start is if you could let us know in Luton what changes you've seen to those accessing frontline services. What does your caseload change be? And of course, that's not just CTR, that's the people you're dealing with who've got arrears and also people who are needing welfare support. Yeah, if you want to comment on those residents that you're now seeing that you didn't see before.
Yes, okay. It's a very strange situation, of course. We've all gone home working. And so the face-to-face channel is effectively in Luton been closed since March the 23rd. And we've been doing a lot of things online and a lot of things through the telephony. You're quite right, the switch from housing benefit to universal credit continues, and I think if anything COVID increased that change. So our housing benefit only claims since February using our caseload data down by 9.52%. Interestingly enough, our CTR only caseload, which is where you would think they would all move to if they'd gone on to universal credit, has only increased by 2.81%. So not everybody that's coming off housing benefit is going on to universal credit and claiming CTR. And it'd be interesting to note what the difference was. Our CTR only claims, though, if you look at that, has actually increased by 11.8% since February. So there is a big, even though our overall caseload has only dropped by 0.5% since February because of the housing benefit drop, it's been effectively replaced by the CTR growth. On arrears, it's quite interesting, and this is where I use the Lift dashboard, and I'm actually using it now whilst talking to you. So we've got data going back to 2018, and since 2018, if you look at the total number, I'm using the outcome tracker of the Lift dashboard. Since 2018, if you look at the number of households that have been either on CTR or housing benefit, it totals 24,698. And if we look at those, of which those households that are in the cohort from February to now, of those 24,698, 10,381 of them were in it back in 2018 and are still on benefits of some sort, whether it be CTR or housing benefit. Now, that's 10,381. But just looking at the impact between February and September, our average arrears data actually has gone down by, of over £250, has gone down by 1%. So even though our council tax collection rates are down by 2.5% in that period to where we would normally be, our actual large arrears has actually gone down. The interesting statistic for me is the cash shortfall, where people don't have enough money to pay their rent. And that's gone down as a percentage of that cohort from 20% to 17%. That's dropped by 3%. Now, the only thing I can think of that is driving that is the switch to universal credit, and the additional £20 a week on universal credit is meaning that actually, as we know, universal credit has a bad press, and not everybody that goes onto it is worse off. And in fact, our data says 64% of people that were on our original housing benefit would be better off on the universal credit. So whilst they are having an unemployment event, that's proved out because the Lift dashboard is telling me unemployment has risen by 7% from 67% to 74%. Obviously, they're getting slightly better benefits on universal credit. So it's not all gloom and doom, but it is showing a massive rise in unemployment. 7,141 were in unemployment in February, and now we have 329 of the households moved into unemployment of working age by September 2020. So that's probably explaining the drop in housing benefit. Those people became unemployed. And 56 households actually moved out of unemployment in that period between February and September. So a lot more going into unemployment than staying in. So yeah, I think this just highlights, Zoe, that I have an immense amount of data that the LIFT dashboard gives me, of which I can present to my councillors who are making decisions. We changed the scheme last year. They've decided to change the scheme this year. We're currently out to consultation. So in combination of the consultation feedback, I can give the feedback and the context of our residents to the councillors so they can make an informed decision. Because at the moment, it hasn't shown through yet in council tax arrears, but I'm pretty certain it will. There's just a time lag.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting, Clive, because that does reflect the research we did on the impact of those uplifts that were given to people. We saw 6% of people who were in crisis, not in crisis, but I think your use of that data and the assumptions you can make because of those figures does show that actually it is really complicated. There is lots of interaction. We all know unemployment's going up, but actually, for some people who've had to move onto universal credit, that uplift has actually made quite a lot of difference. And I think particularly around the self-employed is the removal of the minimum income floor has made a huge difference to them. So yeah, I think that's really interesting. You've talked a lot about how you've used your data to sort of understand what's happened up to this point. Is it coming into how you're planning for the future, apart from your CTR scheme changes? I mean, in terms of your customer-facing services?
Oh, absolutely. So we have a prevention team that sits in our customer services section, and they're using this data to target households proactively that are worse off under the scheme changes that we currently put in place in April. And they're proactively making contact predominantly through the telephone. But as part of the scheme changes, £800,000 of that saving has gone back into mitigation, and that's employment training or skills training. And as you can see, with a 7% increase in unemployment, it's even more important that we put our mitigation and our support for training and skills into place as quickly as possible. It's been a little bit more difficult than we anticipated because most of our training is now online, whereas we were anticipating people to come in for some training. But good regards to our business support unit that do the training, skills training. They've switched predominantly to online training now, so it's still continuing. And that is absolutely critical to making sure that we reduce the pressure on budgets going forward. I am desperate. You've shown me that preview. I've got a councillor meeting early in November. The consultation ends on the 2nd of November, and I'm desperate to have that preview data. So yes, I already had a look at the screen earlier on, but I know it's in development.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to exactly what you were saying earlier, Clive, that actually, although we can look at the situation now and we've got figures in front of us saying this is a caseload now, this is the impacts on our collection rate, our arrears now. Actually, once you start forecasting, even the best case scenarios, probably there is going to be an increase. And using that data to plan, I think, is utterly crucial. Do you actually use the data to target any support? So I'm talking about discretionary benefits like around DHPs, and you've got your prevention team, and I know that they're engaging with people who've been affected by your CTR changes. But what about other welfare assistants and DHPs? Do you target those, or do you leave that to be reactive when people come in?
It's more of an ambition because of the resources that we have available to actually assist people, and we're predominantly looking at the people that have been impacted by the CTR change. But we do have the information on those that are possibly should be claiming a discretionary housing payment and are not. So in that contact with the people that we're targeting specifically, if we can see whether they are entitled to or not just from the dashboard, for potentially a discretionary housing payment, and encourage them to apply. And if we have time, then we use the dashboard to make contact to those people that potentially, there are lots of benefits. Some of the free school meals, for instance, applications, we can see those from the dashboard as well, and we can actually contact those residents if we have resource to do so.
Yeah, internally, Clive, what is your department's, what have you done so far up to this point in response to the changes to now? Have you put more people on the front line? That's just an example, but or put more people to work with those with arrears, or is that something you're planning for the future?
In our recovery section, of course, we didn't do any recovery for the first 3 months. That was stopped altogether. We're now putting all of that resource to try and friendly nudge those people that are struggling, and if we identify through our telephone contact through recovery anybody that is potentially struggling, we can check through the Lift dashboard, see if they are one of those with a cash shortfall, and put them through to the prevention team for further advice and guidance, and possibly skills training and support. So we've got 4 additional people. That team is a brand new team since April, and we have a process of the council tax recovery people referring people on to those specialist advisors for advice and guidance, and it's maximising some of the existing support that was there before as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see such low take up of certain things that can really boost people's income. And we, you know, none of us are in a position where we can really make huge changes to government policy on these things, but we can make sure that at least households get what, you know, every bit of it, income they can at the moment. And, you know, that will actually help them with arrears. And we know that arrears causes all sorts of well-being issues, as well as huge problems for the council and the level of support they're able to offer if the council isn't getting in the money it needed. So that maximisation, I think, is absolutely hugely important. It's
essential.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if, final question, Clive, before we get on to questions, I'm sure there'll be loads of questions to you. We had a long conversation yesterday for the listeners when we were discussing this. There's so much information from Luton to actually hear about how a council's coping on the front line, and actually there's so much we haven't brought into this conversation because we're focusing on future forecasting. But when you start looking at the resource, the income changes that Luton has had to face, and of course the new services that Luton has had to provide. I mean, you're now, I presume, sorry, before we get to the last question, how are you coping with the £500 lockdown payment? Have you sorted that out? Are you up and running?
Yes, that is live. Went live on Monday, and yeah, so far, touch wood, we're okay. It's just another example of I call it fly by wire, but that's probably doing a disservice to how aeroplanes fly. It does, I think, by wire. I think it feels as if you're walking a very dangerous tightrope, and you could quite easily fall off, particularly when they announce changes in the regulation and they send it through at sort of 5:40 or 6 o'clock at night, just before you're about to launch. Based on the previous.
You had a couple of weeks to implement. I think local authorities have done a fantastic job. Some of the councils we're working with, the amount of new resources they've managed to find in very, very tightened circumstances to help those who need support. But then being charged by central government with continually new services you have to offer is a real juggle. I mean, I just cannot. I really hats off to everyone who's working at those frontline organisations now, because it's quite extraordinary what you've achieved. Is there any advice you'd give to other councils about planning for the future before we move on to questions?
Yes, I think look at the data that you have. You have an absolute gold mine of data, and as Louise presented to me today through this webinar, there is some surprising causes and effects of things. It's not, you know, everybody I talked to talked about council tax collection going down, and it is, but arrears haven't yet gone down, and that to me is the big surprise. And it's all about the time, the cause and the effect, and the time lag. And I think the arrears will certainly go up by the end of the year. And it's that uncertainty at the moment that we have. So looking at the worst case, if the £20 and all the LHA is removed in April, and the best case can really give you some. I was at the Revenues and Bends managers for Hearts and Beds yesterday. We were saying that we feel like gypsies with looking into the future, looking into a cloudy crystal ball, trying to predict, you know, a fortune teller, I should say, and it's very difficult. So use the data you've got to give an estimate, and it really is only an estimate. But local data, we've got an airport which is not providing much employment at the moment for people. So for Luton, it's particularly hard because all of the hospitality sector that's associated, all the hotels and restaurants that's associated along with the airport employment, makes our case unique, and every council will have unique data. So it is that local spin on national impact.
Thank you, Clive. And actually, I think you're absolutely right. All the analysis we've done has shown that the local effects are absolutely unique. And in fact, any forecasting does need to use local data, look at the local economic situation, and do local forecasting. So I would completely agree with your point there. I suppose at this point, I'm running out of time here, so I better hand over to Janet in case there's any questions. Oh yes, I just there's not just known unknowns, there's unknown unknowns. It's exactly what Clive was saying. Things are just hitting frontline organisations left, right and centre, especially people who have to deliver services. But particularly for local authorities, they can make a difference. And a lot of this comes exactly what Clive said, in that movement of resources, the 4 extra people helping people who've been affected. You can make a CTR scheme that doesn't affect those who are in arrears. Louise was discussing that. Look at your data, any design of CTR scheme, see how it supports your current residents. Debt recovery policy, extremely important. Clive was talking about how those with CT arrears are then firstly signposted to support an income maximisation. I think that's absolutely crucial. We should at least make sure everybody's got as much benefits as they possibly can. Discretionary support, there's been more money to local authorities for discretionary support. Well, that's not enough to cover those affected by the benefit cap and things. It's still a drop in the ocean, but it's there. And I think targeting that, as Clive mentioned, really, really important. That's a really positive difference councils can make. And just to underline exactly that, what we've been talking throughout this whole webinar is the only way to forecast is use your local data, because we're experts at forecasting. We're finding it really tricky. We're ending up with quite wide ranges. So like for Luton's data, but use your local data, and then you can target support and you can forecast and plan for the future. Oh, didn't mention Marcus Rashford there, just to show you can make a difference.
Yes, a bit of inspiration. Brilliant, lovely. Thank you very much, Zoe. Right, so now let's go over to our Q&As, I think. I think a lot of what has been talked about today has really struck a chord with everybody. So let me see if I can pick out the questions from people. So I have a question here, and I think this is for yourself, Clive. Is the prevention team, I think that you mentioned, within customer service, is that new as a result of COVID, or has it always been in situ? Have you always had that team?
Okay, good question. It's new, but it's not new because of COVID. It's new because we changed our CTR scheme in April, and part of the options were to actually provide, because we were reducing benefits to some households, was to provide income maximisation and skills and training and employment ready training for those people that might be impacted by that change. So coincidentally, it's been very useful to have made that decision back. We made that decision as an executive last December 19. So I think COVID was only a twinkle in Wuhan in December 19. Nobody realised it was going to happen. So it's very fortunate that it's in place, but it was because of our council tax changes that came in April.
Brilliant, lovely, thank you. I have a point really, I suppose, rather than a question as such. But this particular person, I won't mention the council name just just to respect. This person says that their council has a dedicated link up with council tax, so that those who are struggling or in arrears are referred to their money support team for income maximisation and debt support. Any reflection, any comment on that from this particular council?
Yeah, I think that's how we would like to see all. You know, I think we've just done some work with the GLA looking at council tax collection, and on that, the biggest correlation around collection wasn't people's policy. It wasn't that if you're really hard on people or you have a flexible policy, that didn't correlate with collection. What correlated with collection was poverty levels and the CTR scheme, and they were the only they were the only absolute correlations we found. So in fact, that does mean that most people who can pay will pay, and that automatic signposting of people with CT arrears, if you can get them to maximise support and support at that stage, we will be having breathing space coming. There will be other stuff coming in over time because Cabinet Office is taking real interest in this. But Clive was saying they do exactly the same at Luton. It seems absolutely necessary. There is no point making life worse for those who can't pay. You need to. You know, those who can't pay need support as much as you can give. And I just think it's great that more and more councils are doing this. I think more and more councils are aware of this now, and it's really good to hear. So, Clive, do you want to?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. There's absolutely no point. And unfortunately, the council tax legislation really does drive people into debt because you summons them and we charge them a £75 summons fee. So they can be good payers all of their lives and then become unemployed and then decide not to pay the council tax, and then straight away we're getting a liability order, charge them an extra £75 on the perhaps one payment of £150 that they've missed to pay. So we do things like texting all of our debtors before we do a summons run, just to say please engage with us, please make an arrangement. If you can pay, do pay, because it's going to cost you an extra £75 if we do go ahead in the following week and summons you. So yeah, it's absolutely the right approach. We use propensity to pay data as well from our credit referencing agency. So we look at people's overall debt besides council tax debt, and we do actually proactively target the won't payers and try and make arrangements or refer them to our prevent team for the can't payers. That's absolutely critical.
Brilliant, lovely. Thank you, everybody. I've just got one last question, I suppose, and maybe for the policy experts amongst us. So you might want to take this one. This person said, I've been trying to find out whether the move to universal credit will begin in November. I'm presuming that means migration in November 2020 as planned. But the response I've had from DWP is that there is no news about this. Has anyone else heard anything about it either way? A plea.
As far as I know, the response is there is no news about this. But I think the chances of them doing, I think that they're knowing that this migration is happening. You know, even if they'd introduced managed migration, they would not have had as many people migrate. As you know, as Clive was saying, people are migrating naturally. By keeping that differential between level legacy and universal credit, everybody who is better off and actually will be better. I mean, there's loads of provisos around that. A lot of people need individual support, so because you can't move back. So a lot of people might think they'd be better off if they move to UC now, but actually that £20 has dropped, or a minimum income floor comes back in, they won't be better off. So there's a lot of individual work needed with people, but I think they're using that to sort of move people over. So I'm expecting managed migration to sort of come in quite a long way down the line now. Yeah, we're in the same position as you. We don't know when it's going to come in, but I think that probably more people are moving over to UC than could have ever managed under managed migration.
Brilliant. Okay, and then just one last final question here. What are your thoughts on a more robust referral from welfare benefits to employment support, as our current referral process isn't very effective? So that's referring from welfare benefits to employment support. How do you do that within Luton, Clive?
Well, we have, as I say, our prevent team. So we've developed a process from our council tax recovery officers and enforcement agents to refer to the welfare prevention team in customer services. They are linked to Citizens Advice, they commission. We have commission through our employment skills and learning, adult learning people. We have commissioned a set of resources in adult learning, and they just refer on to those people in adult learning. Once we've gone through the income maximisation support in existing advice that is available and support to people, and we can refer them through to we have a big employment skills programme in Luton, and that's all part of our 2040 No One in Poverty vision for the council, which is a very, very ambitious vision to have nobody living in poverty by 2040. And all of these are the small steps that we are making towards it. But yeah, I mean, we also had not as strong link with adult learning until the summer of last year, and we've developed that link and those methods of referral to them by working with them. And we created the budget to do that through the savings that we managed to make with our scheme change last year. But it was very important. We took 1.2 million out and we put 800,000 back of that in mitigation and skills training. So a very important thing to do. And our scheme at the moment is under £1 million spent less than even with the growth. So the mitigation appears to be working. And I'm just, because we only started in April, I'm just gathering the first 6 month stats on that now to see how many people we've actually put into employment through that process.
Brilliant.